And we're live. Put on Do Not Disturb here. There we go. Hello, everybody. So today I wanted to finish the review of Season 1, Episode 2 of The Path. Somehow I've managed to essentially do, after this video, a 2-hour review of a 1-hour show. That is quite an accomplishment, if I do say so myself. Hello, Lee. Let me just get this thing going real quick. Hello in Poland. Hello in St. Louis. Is that Indiana? Hello in Atlanta. Hello in Ireland, Utah, and Michigan. Hello in Tampa. So I have this problem every single video. The one thing I can't seem to figure out is that link, when I'm on my browser and I'm looking at my live stream, the link that I'm copying is like the back end link. And when I post it, it tells people they cannot access that link. I do not know how to find the public facing link. And I don't want to spend too much time trying to figure it out. If anybody else wants to tweet out the link, I will retweet it. All right, let's see. Let's give this another shot, though. All right, anyone watching can post it. If anyone watching is not yet a member of the supporters of Leah, Remini, Scientology, and the Aftermath Facebook group, go ahead and jump on into that group. We have about, this is like the official, it's going to be the official page. On Tuesday, Leah's going to tweet out the link to this thing. I said that last week, but last week was a rerun, and I forgot about that. This is going to be like the official kind of fans supporter group for the show. We're going to treat it as the FAQ page for the show. We've got about 40 of the show's contributors as moderators on this group. And it's a great place to ask questions about the show. You can ask questions directly to the people who are on the show and about Scientology in general and get your questions answered. Also, I did a video yesterday with Chris Shelton that he already posted on his channel. Go ahead and check that out. We talked about the RPF and the idea of whether the RPF has been disbanded or canceled and what that would mean for the Sea Organ for Scientology. And we had a great chat about that. And yeah, so if anybody wants to post a link to this live stream in that supporters group, I'm tired of posting the wrong link. All right, so let's cut to the review and then we'll jump into just some normal questions. Find where I left off here. Okay, so if you have not already seen part 1 of this review, please might as well watch that first. Hello in Thailand. Okay, so we cut to a scene where Hawk, who's Hawk is Aaron Paul's son in this show. And Hawk has been raised in the movement. He's been raised in the Myris, and he goes to public school for now. And this girl in the school has brought him over to her house to ask him for help with her family because she's being evicted. I think it's her sister and her mom. I just can't remember how many siblings she has and if it's brothers or sisters, but they're about to be evicted. And Hawk doesn't know that this is why the girl's bringing him over to her house. She has heard that the Myers brought in a bunch of people into their compound who didn't have anywhere to go after this tornado. So she's hoping that he will bring her family into the compound so that they're not homeless when they get evicted. Her father died. Her father died in an accident, and her mom is now a single widow, and she's kind of letting things go, and she's not paying the bills and stuff like this. Okay, so Hawk goes into her bedroom, and she's like, I want to show you something. And he goes, did your dad did your dad die in a really bad way? And she's kind of like, what is wrong? She's like, what's wrong with you? You ask really personal questions. And Hawk says, oh, I'm sorry. We were taught to say what we think. Otherwise we get burdened, like weighed down. And I didn't immediately find any very strong similarity to Scientology, just as the way Scientologists live their lives on a day-to-day basis. But what this did remind me of is specifically in an auditing session. Someone who's receiving auditing is called a pre-clear, and a pre-clear is supposed to have their attention on themselves and on their mind, and they're not supposed to have their attention on the auditor or on the auditing session. And you really, as a pre-clear, if you've gotten a lot of auditing, you are in the frame of mind where there's nothing you're not supposed to say. There's no fleeting, embarrassing thought that you're not supposed to be willing to communicate. There's nothing you're supposed to feel the need to withhold from your auditor. That's the word they would use for it, is withholding. So Hawk uses this word, otherwise we get burdened. And I think at first I just didn't really associate the word burdened with the concept of withholding. And even still, this is really a concept that applies specifically to in an auditing session. Scientologists don't necessarily go around just blabbing all about their personal lives to anybody who will listen. But because you do get so used to saying anything in an auditing session, which for me is why I didn't like getting auditing, because I don't like saying anything in an auditing session. I think you will find that Scientologists amongst themselves do have a tendency to overshare because they don't consider it oversharing. And it's funny, I was in one of the talks I had recently with Chris Shelton, he mentioned to me that this is one of the things he struggled with when he left the Sea Org. He had spent so many years getting sec checks on the RPF that he really was in that frame of mind where there was really nothing he was not willing to say or not comfortable saying. And that when he left the Sea Org and went into working for these non-Scientology companies, it actually did come up as a problem. Like he would just say way too much. And people would be like, they weren't used to people sharing like that the way Scientologists are used to sharing. So that was just a small little thing. Next scene, they cut to a scene of the Myrists, and a bunch of the Myrists in there, they're all wearing the same colored t-shirts with the Myrist symbol on it, and they're handing out flyers on the street. And I can't remember if this was in the street or if this was in the park. And Cal is Hugh Dancy's character, we shouldn't still be doing this. My dad had me out there when I was 5 years old handing out flyers. Some people even used to spit at me. Someone called child services once. Okay, so this cracked me up. Not because I ever got spit on as a child or had child services called when I was a child, but because, yes, we were, as children, out on the streets of Philadelphia handing out Scientology promo leaflets. I'm trying to think exactly how old we were, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old. The nanny would just take all the kids and we would go out on the street and you'd have a whole bunch of little freaking kids handing out promo on the streets of downtown Philadelphia. So when I saw that in the show, they literally have a scene of little kids handing out promo, I just thought to myself, I don't know, what other group do you see has little kids handing out promo? Like, how can the consultant for this show know that that's a thing? Or I really should say was a thing. It's really, you're not really going to see that anymore. Not because anyone in Scientology is against having kids do that kind of work, but because it's just bad PR. It makes the church look bad, and that's why they don't do it anymore. Okay, so that was just a small point. Cal, it goes on and on and on about how he wants to change how the Myrists are reaching out to the community. He says, if people could hear what we are about, people would flock to us. So this also reminded me of what's happening in Scientology with the Scientology Media Productions studio. Scientology has always had state-of-the-art recording and broadcast facilities at Golden Air Productions up at the International Base. But recently, the church bought the old KCET Studios on Sunset Boulevard. They bought this massive television and broadcast studio, and they renovated the hell out of it. And everything in there is brand new and state-of-the-art. And the pitch that Miscavige made to the Scientology public is that that this would finally move Scientology into the big time as far as its ability to get its message out to the billions of Earth. Now, you might be wondering, why do you need $100 million television and broadcast studio to reach the billions of Earth? There's a little something called YouTube. You could reach the billions of Earth with nothing. And yet Scientology, Miscavige particularly, decided to take this effort. It's really because they have to spend a certain amount of money for tax purposes. And so he spends money on real estate and big giant facilities that aren't really necessary, but it makes it look like Scientology is expanding. It makes Scientologists think that Scientology is expanding. And it serves its accounting purpose. So, but just the fact that Cal is sitting here going, no, we need to reposition our entire method of reaching the world was just a reflection to me of what Miscavige has been doing recently with Scientology media productions. So then they cut to a scene where Aaron Paul's character arrives home, and his wife is there. His wife is Michelle Monaghan, and she has the Myrists version of an e-meter. And this really cracked me up. So Michelle's sitting on the couch in the living room, and she's got like an electrode attached to her throat. She has an electrode attached to her forehead, and then the wires are hooked up to this electronic machine. And the electronic machine has like an outline of a human body on it. And she has her pants unbuttoned, which I will explain in a moment. So there is no question in my mind. Okay, the TV show, it's about a cult. And they've got a freaking electronic machine. And you know that's the Scientology e-meter. You know they're making fun of the Scientology e-meter. Is there any other religious group out there that has some electronic device that they use in their counseling? Now, I think the Myrists call whatever it is they do with their machine realigning or realignment. I'm pretty sure. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. So of course I'm looking at this thing. I'm looking at the scene. She's got the thing stuck to her head. She got the thing stuck to her throat. I'm like, well, that's silly. Like the e-meter is not silly. And then she stands up and she buttons her pants. Okay, why is this hilarious? Because in an auditing session, in a Scientology auditing session where you're on the e-meter, you almost always have to unbutton your pants in order to get comfortable, because for some reason, when you have tight and restrictive clothing, it causes an increased resistance to the electrical flow. I'm not going to claim to understand the science behind that. All I know is that the one thing the e-meter does do is measure resistance to an electrical flow. It measures how conductive or how resistant the entire body is or the skin is. And for whatever reason, when you have tight and restrictive clothing, it increases the resistance, and the tone arm on the e-meter reads too high. And I don't want to get into all the rules of auditing, but the tone arm on the e-meter is you have little levers and you have big levers on increasing the voltage in the e-meter. No matter what, you're only talking about a couple volts at most. But the tone arm, when the tone arm, the higher the tone arm is, the more voltage is going through the circuitry of the body and the e-meter. You're not supposed to start an auditing session when the tone arm is above 3.0. So if the pre-clear picks up the cans and the tone arm is above 3.0, you're supposed to go through a whole checklist of items to figure out why the tone arm is reading too high. And the most common item on the list is your clothing is too tight. And people that get a lot of auditing, they already know this. They already know how it works. So when they walk into an auditing room and they sit down in the auditing chair, they take off their shoes and they take off their socks and they unbutton their pants and then they sit down. And again, it just made me think. Now, this is before I was told who was allegedly consulting on this show. Before I was told that it was the guy who founded Landmark, I was almost positive it had to be a former Scientologist. And maybe someone else who knows better than I can comment below just what exactly the involvement was. The founder of EST and the founder of Landmark, just what exactly was their involvement in Scientology? Because Scientologists have always been taught that EST was a complete ripoff of Scientology. But I've never known why L. Ron Hubbard said that. I've never heard him provide the details for why he was saying EST was ripoff of Scientology. I have been told that the guy that founded EST, Werner Erhard, was absolutely in Scientology in San Francisco back in the, I want to say 60s or 70s, but I get it all mixed up. So if you happen to know more than I do about that subject, which hopefully you do because I don't know much, tell me about it in the comments below, and that would be amazing. So, so whoever's consulting on the show understands that pre-clears usually have to unbutton their pants in an auditing session. So that cracked me up. Let's see. Moving on to another scene. Aaron Paul's character, his wife, Michelle Monaghan, is pressuring him to do the 14 days in-house. And if you don't know what that means, just look at the other previous video, season 1, episode 2, part 1. And he says, so they're having a conversation. She's pressuring him to do the 14 days in house. He says, sitting in a cell and getting my bio realigned and telling the nitty gritty of my life is going to make it better, because it's designed to make it better and the pain will just go away. And she says, well, we have to try. So that description to me, sitting in a cell, getting my bio realigned, which we know really means auditing in Scientology, or telling the nitty gritty of my life. Well, that's sec checking in Scientology. So we're talking about sitting in a cell that you can't really get out of, getting sec checked. That's the RPF. That is the RPF in Scientology. That is what Sea Org members are subjected to for years on end. And for more information about that, definitely watch the video that I did with Chris Shelton yesterday on his channel talking about the RPF. Moving on to the next scene, Hawk. So what are we talking about? We're supposed to think that Eddie is starting big with him. No, that's not really important. So a lot of my notes, I'm trying only to talk about the notes that actually have similarities to Scientology and not just describing the entire plot of the show. All right, let's see. Hugh Dancy's character, Cal, he wants to do a 10-minute human interest piece with the local news media. And everybody else in the movement is against him talking to the press. And Sarah, who is Michelle Monaghan's character, keeps saying that Steve, the founder of the Myers, would be against it. So in this TV show, just to reiterate, Hugh Dancy, the actor, and Cal is the character. He is the David Miscavige figure in this show. He is the one who was brought into the movement as a young child, but was not actually born into it. He is the one who amasses power to himself through deceit and deception and underhanded means. He's the one who really is trying to make all of this about him. And the reason I thought this part of the show was very interesting is because David Miscavige, back in the, I want to say it was the early 90s, but I'm not always great with dates. He did a sit-down interview with Ted Koppel that was at least an hour long, and Ted Koppel won an Emmy for it. And it was the last time David Miscavige ever spoke to a reporter publicly. It was like, I want to say 30 years ago now. But Miscavige thought that by sitting down with this reporter, he was going to be able to just blow everyone's socks off. He was going to show how amazing Scientology was. He was going to be able to just run all over Ted Koppel. He was going to be able to completely discredit all Scientology critics, that he was so good and had so much charisma. He was going to be able to win everybody over on this TV show. And I was just really struck that they're kind of writing that into the script. Cal is the new de facto leader because Dr. Steve Meyer is off riding the last 3 rungs of the ladder. And while the leader is off and Cal has temporary control, he's making it about himself. He's trying to get eyeballs on him and get people to, he's trying to sort of replace the leader as the one people look to. So he does this 10-minute piece. Let's see, I'm getting ahead of myself. So Michelle Monaghan's character is like, this is not okay. Steve would not be for this. And Cal says, I was with Steve before he went into lockdown to start writing the last 3 rungs of the ladder. And he said to me that the time will come when the message will bring us love. And he goes, he literally said that to me, Sarah. So this cracked me up because David Miscavige is able to routinely get away by completely changing long-standing Scientology policies that were written by L. Ron Hubbard. And he gets away with changing these policies by saying that he had private communications from L. Ron Hubbard that instructed him to make these changes at the right time. So I just thought that was a nice little throwback. That's exactly what Miscavige has gotten away with time and time again. So Michelle Monaghan's character says she will need to hear it from Steve directly, and Cal says that's not going to be possible. And he calls her out. Are you implying that I'm seizing an opportunity? And she calls him out on just on doing that. And again, I'm not trying to nitpick every little part of the story, but there were people who were in the Sea Org and had a lot of power during the time when David Miscavige was also consolidating power to himself. And there were people who even had were in senior positions of authority than Miscavige was when he was starting to consolidate all this power. And they did step up to him, and they did try to keep him from getting away with it. And those people were completely steamrolled, just because Miscavige was able to attract to him people that were more loyal to him than they were loyal to the people senior to them. And Cal is basically doing the same thing in this show. All right, let's see. Already did that. Okay. So they cut to a scene where back to a scene where Hawk's in public school. And somebody walks by Hawk, doesn't walk by him, walks up to him and calls him Jim Jones. He says, "Hey, Jim Jones, keep your Kool-Aid away from my girlfriend." Just wanted to make a note that I read the most recent biography about Jim Jones, and I did a video about how I actually think that Jim Jones and the People's Temple, as crazy as this sounds, did more with their social programs and what they did for their members. I'm not talking about what happened in the last year or two and what happened with the mass suicide. That's a totally different beast. But the People's Temple actually did more good for its members in the early days of the organization and more good for society at large than Scientology has ever done. And considering how destructive the People's Temple ended up being in the end, I think that's really saying something. I was really struck in that book. Well, one thing that really struck me was just how unique Scientology actually is not, and how much Scientology has in common with a lot of other of these cult is an overused word, but a lot of these other cults and high control groups, and that the similarities between Jim Jones and L. Ron Hubbard was unbelievable, even more so than Miscavige actually. But that even in the early days of that movement, you could see how the good that they were actually doing for people in the community was used to justify in the minds of the members the lies and the weirdness and the deception. And that is true in Scientology as well, except that the social betterment programs that the People's Temple had going on were actual programs that helped actual people, whereas most of the church's social betterment programs are just publicity stunts. They don't actually really give a damn about helping pretty much anybody, other than other Scientologists. I'm kind of diverging there, but I just wanted to comment about that. Moving on. Okay, so they're cut to a scene where Aaron Paul's character is trying to look up the history of a member who, so far, we're being led to believe might have been murdered by the organization. In other words, there's a former Meyerist whose wife believes was killed by another Meyerist. And she's trying to get Aaron Paul to believe that this happened and to investigate the injustice and find out what happened. Aaron Paul goes to one of the administrative offices where there's just a bunch of office people working in an office at a computer. There's a big eye of Meyerism on the wall. And he says to the lady, "Hey, can we look up someone in the system?" And she pulls up the computerized system, and they look up the name Jason Kemp. And again, I know I might be getting a little nitpicky here, but just the fact that they have a whole software, a whole database of all of their members and the history of everything their members have done. I know that's normal for a company and customers to do. I don't know if that's normal for a religious group. Scientology has that exact thing. Scientology has complete digital records. They also have paper records because they refuse to get rid of them. But the digital records of everyone who has ever bought any book from the organization, taken any course from the organization, donated any money to the organization going back 40, 50 years. You can look up the complete history of any member from almost any central computer in any org. And so that was kind of a throwback to that. All right, let's see. I'm trying to get through this quickly. So Hawk gets into a fight at school. After the fight, his dad picks him up. He's pissed off that he can't take his vows and start climbing the ladder. Then we learn, okay, here we go. We learn that before Will, Aaron Paul, went on his retreat to Peru to do one of the rungs of the ladder, he told his son Hawk that he would let him leave school and start climbing the ladder. And it was only when Aaron Paul got back from Peru that he told Hawk, no, you're going to have to hold off. You're going to finish school. You're going to stay in school. You can climb the ladder when you turn 16 and after you finish school. So this, in the show, Hawk thinks that his dad changed his mind because his dad is supposed to have cheated on his wife while he was in Peru. We, as the viewer, know that the reason Aaron Paul's character changed his mind is because his experience in Peru doing one of these early rungs of the ladder, made him doubt whether Meyerism is even true, whether what Dr. Steve Meyer writes is even true, whether the ladder is real. It made him doubt all of this. And this is why he told Hawk to stay in school. There's not, I haven't noted down any specific similarities to Scientology about that, but the reason I wanted to comment on this is because in this conversation, he lets his son continue believing that the reason he wants him to stay in school, the reason he changed his mind, is because he cheated on his wife. And he's letting his son continue to believe this because he feels like that is a better option than being honest with his son that he's starting to have doubts about the organization and about the movement. And that is why I wanted to mention this scene, is because in Scientology, there is nothing, I don't mean to use too much hyperbole, but there is nothing worse you could do than to let someone else think that you are actually doubting Scientology. And I can't think of an actual example in real life where somebody was like, somebody decided to let their spouse believe they were being unfaithful instead of letting them believe they were doubting Scientology. I can't think of a real example where that's happened. But I just really wanted to emphasize that point, that part of the Scientology belief system includes the fact that if Scientology doesn't work well on you, which is really the only thing in the mind of a Scientologist that would cause you to doubt whether it's true or not. If Scientology doesn't work on you very well, then there's something really, really wrong with you. And usually what's wrong with you is you're a fucking evil ass person. Even if it's something you're not doing in this lifetime, but it's past lifetimes and you haven't taken responsibility for it or whatever. It really means you are at core a bad, bad person. And to let other Scientologists know that you're doubting whether Scientology works or not is pretty much tantamount to saying Scientology doesn't work on me because I'm a suppressive person. And I just thought they did a great job writing into the show the fact that Aaron Paul's character is so scared of anyone thinking he's doubting the movement. He would rather let his wife think he's been unfaithful and even let his son believe that he's been unfaithful to his son's mother. Okay, so moving on. Aaron Paul finally agrees to do the 14 days in-house. And Sarah says, why? And he goes, just to get it all over with. And it sounds like, in this conversation, it sounds like Michelle Monaghan's character was actually starting to doubt as well. It sounded like the fact that Aaron Paul was refusing to do the 14 days in-house had caused Michelle Monaghan's character to go, well, maybe all of this, maybe my husband has a point. Maybe there's something to his complaints here. Maybe there's something to his doubt. She almost sounded disappointed that he had finally decided to do the 14 days. So Sarah, Aaron Paul's wife, and his son, they walk him into the building where he's going to do the 14 days in-house. And Hawk, the son, says, we have to do better than the IS. The IS means ignorant systemite or ignorant systemite. I don't know the proper pronunciation. Aaron Paul gets put into a room with a cot and a sink, and it looks like a prison cell, and his counselor goes in with him, and the door is shut and locked. And the locking of the door I thought was interesting because in an auditing session, this is interesting because public Scientologists don't get told this. You don't find this out until you yourself do auditor training, which public can do, but they usually get auditing first. An auditor is not permitted to allow a pre-clear to leave the auditing room until the auditing session has been properly concluded. A pre-clear means someone who is not clear. So pre-clear or PC is used as a general term for pretty much anybody getting auditing. Once somebody goes clear, you're supposed to call them a pre-OT, but PC is just what people use. PC is the word used for someone who's getting auditing. If you're an auditor and you're auditing a PC and they get up and leave the room and you allow them to do that, pretty much all of your auditor certificates are going to be canceled and revoked, and you're going to have to redo all of your auditor training. It is considered a very serious offense to allow a pre-clear to leave the auditing room. And auditors are literally trained to physically prevent PCs from leaving an auditing session. You're not trained to actually like hit them or fight them, but you are trained to put your hands on them and in a very assertive, dominant way, get them to continue on with the auditing session. And that to me is what the locked door represents when they went into this counseling room. The cot and the sink, again, I've already discussed this in a previous video, that this idea of doing an in-house is kind of a combination of doing the RPF and doing the introspection rundown, which I've already defined in the previous video. Okay, moving on. We're getting close here. Hugh Dancy goes on to this news show. He finally does it. He explains that they call Dr. Stephen Meyer the guardian of the light. Cal sort of struggles for a moment to describe what his role in the organization is, and he says, just call me responsible for East Coast. Okay. So Scientology in America is divided up into East US and West US. There's actually, there's about 7 or 9 different continents in Scientology, depending on how you define them. And in the United States, it's divided up into West US and East US. Everything east of the Mississippi is East US. Everything west of the Mississippi is West US. And so when he says, I'm responsible for East Coast, I was like, okay, that's just another way that it's kind of similar to Scientology. The news anchor describes the movement as a little-known cult. And Cal interrupts and says, whoa, it's not a cult. It's a movement. We're people with a simple vision to be everything that God intended when he created us in his image. We believe that by achieving personal enlightenment, you can achieve universal enlightenment and universal truth. We train ourselves to listen. This is how he's describing the movement. If you ever hear Scientology described in the press by a spokesperson for Scientology, you will hear them use very general, self-help, positive, spiritual sort of adjectives as what Cal used to describe Myerism. And then he says, we train ourselves to listen. That is literally the definition of auditing as it is used in Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard says the reason he chose the term auditing to describe counseling is because audit means to listen. And he says this was his way of contrasting Scientology auditing with psychoanalysis. He was also playing on the fact that Scientologists don't actually understand the process of psychoanalysis, and I myself will not claim to understand the process. But the way L. Ron Hubbard differentiated it is that an analyst or a therapist usually is telling you what is wrong with you. I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying this is what Hubbard said. Whereas an auditor is forbidden from telling you what he thinks is wrong with you. An auditor is only allowed to listen and to acknowledge what you said. He's not allowed to offer commentary. He's not allowed to give his opinion. So I was struck by that we train ourselves to listen. So that would be this equivalent of Scientology trains auditors. He says, if we listen closely, you will hear the souls calling out for help. So I know he doesn't mean it exactly in this way, but it did sound to me like he's talking about the OT levels. Auditing, the way it's done below the OT levels, is pretty consistent with this definition of just listening. You're not allowed to tell the person what's wrong with them. You're not allowed to offer them opinions or anything like that. When you get on the OT levels, however, all of the OT levels start with L. Ron Hubbard telling you what is wrong with you and what is wrong with everyone else on this planet. It has to do with these body things, and all of the OT levels have to do with getting rid of these body things that L. Ron Hubbard said exist. And at the upper OT levels, you're not auditing yourself. You're auditing these souls. You're auditing these thetans that are half dead and half degraded and don't even realize they're thetans. They think they're objects. They think they are body parts, or they think they're inanimate objects, and they're stuck everywhere. And you are supposed to be auditing them telepathically to do a little auditing process on them to clear them so that they will sort of wake up, realize that they're a thetan, and go out and pick up a human body and then come back next life, come back and become a Scientologist. That is how Scientologists believe that they are clearing the planet by doing these OT levels, is because they don't have to sit down and audit a new Scientologist for 1,000 hours to make them go clear. They can literally make a clear a day or several clears a day. They go in, they do a little 15-minute auditing session. They telepathically imagine that they're speaking with, half dead, unconscious thetans that are stuck all over the room and the house and everywhere, and that they're clearing these thetans. And that's what Scientologists, when they say we're clearing the planet, the people who've done the OT levels, they know that that's how they think they are clearing the planet. So when he made this description of if we listen closely, you'll hear the souls calling out for help. Well, that is what someone who's on OT7 in Scientology, for example, thinks they're doing. They think that they are auditing these souls, these thetans, that that even though they might not be calling out for help, they need the help. All right, moving on. So in this little interview, he basically recruits the news anchor right there on air. Like by the end of the interview, she's literally like, sign me up. Cut to the next scene. Because he just did this awesome news interview, he's like on cloud nine. He thinks he's such a badass. He did what no one has ever done, which was, dominate a reporter and win and give this message of love. And he thinks he's The Path is a TV show. It's on Hulu. So he basically feels like he's just asserted himself as a leader in this organization. So we cut to a scene that throws back to something we discussed in the last video, which was this member who wanted help with her son, and she wanted help getting him off drugs, and she wanted him to go into the Myers rehab program. So Cal walks right into the rich guy's house. He basically just storms right into the backyard. He's not being polite or deferential in any way, and he just looks at the wife. He says, "We're taking your son, and I promise you we're going to get him off drugs. But here's what I need from you." And he looks to the husband, the rich husband, who doesn't publicly want to be associated with the Myerists. Sorry. He says, "You're going to take the eye. You're going to hang it on the wall above the piano. Then you're going to go buy another eye. You're going to hang it in your office. And then you're going to tell anyone that you invest for about this movement, about how this movement has opened your eyes and made you see the world in a new way, and that it has saved your son." And then two big, giant hulking Myerists in their Myers t-shirts. They show a scene literally dragging the son out of the house, kicking and screaming, while the son is begging his parents to help him. And then Cal says, "I don't give a shit about your millions of dollars. I want your faith." I can't really think of much to say about that. I just thought it was a really striking scene. Even in Scientology, you would never check someone into, like Narconon is the Scientology rehab program, and you would never check someone into that program against their will. There wasn't really an analogy there. I've already covered in the last video the analogy of the Narconon program, and how Narconon is one of the main routes where people actually get into Scientology. So the fact that that was written into the show was interesting. Okay, let's see. Cut to another scene. Aaron Paul's character, he's in the room. He's doing his in-house. He's got the little electronic machine hooked up to him. It looks ridiculous. The interrogations are ongoing. They're going on and on and on. And they do a great job visually of showing, kind of representing how long these non-stop interrogations have been going on for. It clearly seems like he's taking some kind of a drug as well. They show Aaron Paul's character getting very upset and angry, and he's going a bit crazy. It looks like he's starting to lose his mind. Just a combination of so many things relating to enforced sec checking and the introspection rundown in the RPF. And then they show a flashback to when Aaron Paul's character had been in Peru. And they show this image of the founder, Dr. Steve Meyer. And he's in bed, he's in a coma, he's hooked up to machines with a giant snake on him. So I thought this was amazingly symbolic. When I think of, like, it was supposed to be a symbolic thing. It wasn't like there was literally supposed to be a snake on this guy in the hospital, but it showed how people are creeping in to sort of co-opt everything that Dr. Stephen Meyer had been working on. They're taking what he'd created and his movement, and they're trying to figure out how to this is what I read into this, to sort of usurp it and take it to accumulate power and wealth to themselves. That's very reminiscent of David Miscavige's relationship to L. Ron Hubbard. And okay, so they show a flashback to Peru. They show the image of the founder in bed with a coma. We did that. Eddie says, Eddie is still going on with this ruse of letting people believe he had an affair and was cheating on his wife, because he'd rather have people believe that than that he was talking to someone who had left the movement. And without thinking, he gives them a name of some attractive girl who was in Peru when he was in Peru, and says, okay, it was Miranda Frank. That's who I had an affair with. It was Miranda Frank. Like that, he's putting up a lie. And he doesn't seem to realize, we find out later, he actually doesn't realize that he just totally threw her under the bus, and he doesn't realize there's going to be consequences for Miranda Frank. Like, they're not taking this lightly. And so then they cut to another scene. Hugh Dancy is supposedly going off to see Steve. I always think it's interesting that the Meyerists call him Steve, just casually Steve, just like Scientologists call LRH just casually Ron. You could call him anything you want, but he's Steve. Then they show Miranda being picked up by two big ass Meyerists and being put in a van and taken away, and you can see that she's terrified. So many similarities to the Sea Org. Whenever one person gets off some giant, incredible transgression, like, oh my God, I kissed this person, or what in the Sea Org, the rules are much different than in the rest of Scientology. But if one Sea Org member were to get off something like, oh, we slept together, because you're not allowed to sleep together without being married, the other person would absolutely be hauled in, just like they're represented in the TV show here. Okay, then you cut to pretty much the last scene of the show. Hugh Dancy's character, Cal, he goes to Peru. He goes to see Steve. They show, I thought this was great. They show Cal, like, zoomed in, and he's having a conversation with Steve. But you're only seeing Cal's face. You're only seeing the one side of the argument. And Cal is talking to Steve as if they're having a totally normal live conversation. And then it just pans out a bit. It pans out a bit. And you see that Steve is unconscious in a coma in this hospital bed. And you see that everything that Aaron Paul's character has been flashing back to, like all the images that we've seen of Steve being unconscious in a coma in this hospital bed, we've been being led to believe that these are possibly just hallucinations and just visions. And we don't know if it's really true. Because this vision is something that Aaron Paul had while he was in Peru doing one of his steps of the ladder. And we were never really told whether this was an actual observation or whether it was just a vision, a premonition. And we see for the first time that everything that made Aaron Paul's character start to doubt the movement was absolutely true. We find out that Dr. Stephen Meyer really is in a coma. In Peru, he really isn't off writing the last three rungs of the ladder. And we find out for the first time that Cal is absolutely in on the lie. Cal is in on the con. And that's another way that this character is an excellent David Miscavige character, because Miscavige also is in on the lie. Not everybody in Scientology is in on the lie. Not the people who are still in Scientology do not know they are being lied to. They really don't, with only a few exceptions. And when I say lied to, I don't mean, like, it's a subjective matter whether someone thinks Scientology works for them or not, as far as auditing goes. Like, when someone says Scientology helped me, that's because they feel helped. Whether you want to call it hypnosis, whether you want to call it undue influence, whatever you want to call it, we're not debating that. We're saying when someone says they've been helped, it's because they feel they've been helped. So most people in Scientology feels that Scientology works and Scientology is correct because they've done the auditing, and in their minds, it makes them feel better. But these guys don't know that what they're being told about the OT levels is a lie. They don't know that they're being lied to about the fact that there is no OT 9 and 10. There is no 12, 13, 14, 15. L. Ron Hubbard did not finish writing up the last rungs of the ladder. And that's one of the things I love about this show the most is how much of this whole storyline relies on the fact that all of the members, even the senior members, believe that Dr. Stephen Meyer is really off writing up the last three rungs of the ladder. They truly believe this. In their deepest parts of themselves, they believe this is true. And there's only like 3 people of all of the leaders in the organization who know that it's total horseshit. And even of those leaders, there's some of them who have sort of twisted it up in their minds to explain it away. Like, they still don't really think it's a con. Anyway, it really is. It's one of the reasons I really encourage people to watch this show, because it makes understanding what has happened in Scientology a little easier when you see it playing out on screen. Okay, good. That is the end, finally, of my review of episode 2, and it's similar to Scientology. Let me try to pull up some of the Q&A stuff here. I'll answer some questions. Okay, I see a question here about Grant Cardone that I'm going to answer. Just give me a moment. All right. How come Grant Cardone is a hardcore Scientologist? He's a very smart and successful guy. Do you think he has poured so much money into it that he has no other choice? He has done all of the levels. Please don't make the mistake of thinking that because somebody is a smart and successful guy, that they couldn't, shouldn't, or wouldn't fall for Scientology, or that what Scientology does offer its people would not resonate with someone just because they are smart and successful. One thing that Scientology, one thing you can say about it is that it is an incredibly egotistical, I'm going to say philosophy. It is all about self. It is all about how important you are. And I really don't know how to answer this other than saying, if you've seen Grant Cardone's videos, and if you've seen some of his shows, and if you know anything about the guy, he's one of the most fucking egotistical people you've ever met. Like, the world revolves around Grant Cardone, in Grant Cardone's mind. And I'm not just hating on him as an individual. I mean, Scientology breeds people like Grant Cardone. Grant Cardone is also a huge networking guy. He's a big MLM guy. He's a big sales guy. Scientology is one hell of a networking tool, because there aren't that many Scientologists in the world. I like to use the number closer to 50,000. Others use the number closer to 20,000. It's somewhere in between there. It's not much of a difference. Who cares? It's a small world. And if you rise to the top of that world, as Grant Cardone has done, that's quite an impressive network of people, even if it is 20,000 people who all know your name, know you're rich, trust you, look up to you, want to be like you, and could easily be brought into some MLM sales type scheme, as long as you were the one giving it a thumbs up endorsement. So Grant Cardone's motivations are just as base as anyone you'd want to have anything to do with. There's nothing extra special going on up inside that head, other than money and fame. Okay, let's see. I'll probably go from most recent back, since they're going to be the most relevant. He raised about $100 million for charity. Yeah, right. Okay, don't believe it. What do most ex-Scientologists do spiritually after they leave? I think Leah Remini went back to Catholicism. Do most people go back to their family's traditional faith, or are many agnostic now? Some move on to other religions, some don't. I would say the vast majority don't. If I had to guess, I'd say 90% or more than Scientologists just continue to be agnostic or atheist or whatever label they're most comfortable applying. That certainly is true for me. It seems like it's impossible to know. It's demonstrably impossible to know. No bash on any other religion, but Christians know that there is a heaven in the way that Scientologists know that there is full OT. You can't prove it. It is faith, and there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. I don't bash people for their beliefs. And I don't bash Scientologists for believing in the OT levels. I do bash the Church of Scientology for lying to all Scientologists about the fact that there are so many more unreleased OT levels, because that is the lie that they're able to use to keep people in the organization. Someone who makes it up through all the OT levels and obviously has not achieved anything they were hoping to achieve is still able to be trapped inside the organization through this promise No, don't worry. The good stuff hasn't been released yet. So I concentrate more on the lies and the dishonesty and the bad behavior than I do on any belief that seems stupid or crazy, because all religions have beliefs that sound stupid or crazy. All right. Was or is there any similar relationship with LRH and David Miscavige? I think that was a question probably based on something I said about the relationship between Hugh Dancy's character in the show and Dr. Stephen Meyer in the show. Scientologists have an extremely exaggerated belief of what Hubbard's relationship to Miscavige ever was. David Miscavige was never close with L. Ron Hubbard. He was never even one of the senior watch messengers, which I shouldn't even mention the words because I don't want to define them. Miscavige was able to consolidate the power to himself during the period when L. Ron Hubbard was off in seclusion, allegedly writing up the remaining OT levels. And during that time, no one knew where L. Ron Hubbard was except the people who were with him. And Miscavige was not one of those people. Miscavige was on the church side of things. He was the one who, and I'm oversimplifying this, he was the one who ended up having control of the church because there had to be someone there in Hubbard's absence who was taking care of things. So you had Hubbard, and then you had one guy, one of the people who was with him was named Pat Broker. And Pat Broker would take any communication from L. Ron Hubbard and go off to a secret meeting location and meet David Miscavige. And so you can see there's a bottleneck here. The only information that L. Ron Hubbard ever received from the church was information that Miscavige would allow to be forwarded and that Broker would take and forward. And the only information that ever made it to the church from L. Ron Hubbard during the last 6 years of his life was information that Pat Broker allowed to be forwarded and that Miscavige forwarded. So between these two, they controlled the fate and the destiny of anybody in Scientology and the organization itself. How would Hubbard ever even know if Pat Broker changed or altered the orders or directions that were being passed on to Miscavige? How would he ever even know? He had no way of finding out about it. Hubbard had no direct contact with the organization for the last 6 years of his life, save through the communication that had to go through Broker and had to go through Miscavige. So it's not Hubbard never picked Miscavige to run Scientology, but there's not a Scientologist, there's not an active Scientologist who's a member of the Church of Scientology who would believe you if you said that to them. They've all been led to believe that Hubbard picked and groomed Miscavige to take over the organization. Okay, I digressed a bit. So why is it that I'm going to give you some information as to why I believe, why is it that Scientologists don't fall into other faiths very easily? Scientology is, aside from anything else you could say about it, it is a spiritual body of knowledge. And the reason why I say that is Scientologists do legitimately believe that we are all spiritual beings. They're not just giving that lip service. They do actually believe that. And that is how Scientologists justify calling it a religion. Because by definition, a religion does not have to do with a God. I feel like I want to consult the actual definition of religion. But in the mind of a Scientologist, the reason Scientology is a religion is because it really does think that we are all spiritual beings. It does call all of us Thetans, and that auditing really is addressed to, auditing is addressed to you as a spiritual being, at least it's intended to be. And that is how they explain it as being a religion. So if you've grown up in Scientology, or if you've spent decades in Scientology, you are basically dealing with this movement that deals with you spiritually, but only you. There is no higher being acknowledged or dealt with in Scientology. It doesn't come into play in any way. You are basically told that you have all of these godlike characteristics. So if you and all other beings in the universe have these godlike characteristics, then what the hell is the role of a supreme being? Like, there is no role for a supreme being if we are all supreme being-ish. And I just think that because you spend decades and decades and decades thinking of spirituality in a way that is so individualized, and doesn't even grant the idea that there is a higher power who has any more causation in this world greater than you yourself do, that it can be hard to make that jump to all of a sudden going, believing in something greater than you. Now, there is one other way. I hope I can communicate this clearly. One way that Scientologists possibly somehow hold on to this concept of a higher power is in thinking that all thetans collectively somehow either form or tap into something greater than all of us. But again, the way I'm describing it, and if you have your own, if you've been in Scientology, if you were in Scientology for a long time and you have your own thoughts about this, please let me know about it in the comments below. Even that concept, the way I'm describing it, doesn't actually leave space for a truly higher power. It's more like it would be more like a collective power, right? The way I've described it in the past is, and I don't mean to oversimplify this, but someone who believes in God, if you were to say, well, then where did all life come from? Say, well, God created all life. Okay. Well, where did God come from? Well, God has just always been. Or maybe God just decided to be one day, but there is no beginning. God is always. Scientologists think of thetans that same way. If you said to a Scientologist, well, who created the world? Who created the universe? Well, thetans did. Theta. We did. Well, who created us? L. Ron Hubbard doesn't really get into that. But there's enough leeway to believe that, well, we all just created us. We all just spontaneously created ourselves at the same time. Or maybe we each created our own universe, and everything I'm experiencing right now, this is the universe I created. And anyway, I won't go off into too many tangents on this. But because the indoctrination that Scientologists get do not allow for a single higher being to exist, that is why it can be very hard to jump into any other religion. And I honestly don't know why anybody would want to jump into any other religion. I'm not necessarily an advocate of joining any organized religion. To me, it all seems kind of nonsense. But that's just to me. I don't ridicule people who do believe in religion. And I do like to point out that the vast, 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 vast majority of people who believe in any one of these organized religions believe it because they were raised in it. And I know there's exceptions to that, but I think at this day and age, if you're born into a Catholic family, you're probably Catholic. If you were born into a Muslim family, you're probably Muslim. And I've seen great videos that that show regionally. If you're born in this region, you're going to be this. If you're born in this region, you're going to be this. So I think a lot of people who believe in these other religions have not necessarily been reasoned into those beliefs. They've been raised in those beliefs, and that's okay. There's a place for that as well. All right, we're coming up on an hour here. I try not to go over an hour. Let's see, Grant Cardone. That's probably all we need to do for now. Okay, real quick. People have been asking me to comment why I haven't done anything saying how it was like at the Emmy Awards. So I'll quickly do that at the end of this video. I don't want to do a whole video just on that because it seems a little unnecessary. Going to the Emmy Awards last month was absolutely amazing. A handful of us, of the contributors from season 1, were able to make it. Not everybody was able to make it just due to conflicts and whatnot. And one thing that just I was really struck by was how much it was clear that the industry as a whole was rooting for Leah and Remini to win this Emmy. Like, it was really incredible. And I wanted to tell this great little anecdote. Neil deGrasse Tyson and his show was nominated in the same category that Scientology in the Aftermath was nominated. And I'd done my homework before he went. I looked up all the other nominees. I looked up how many times they'd been nominated, how many times they won, and I was like, shit, man, Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's one I'm worried about. And when we got dropped off at the theater for the Emmys, one of the first guys I saw was Neil deGrasse Tyson. I was like, oh my God, it's Neil deGrasse Tyson. Someone get a photo. So I'm like secretly taking photos of him from 50 feet away. I'm like zooming in. All right. So after the actual Emmy ceremony, and we were at the governor's ball, which is just a dinner, and I'd already had a few drinks, so I was a little less inhibited. I walked by Neil deGrasse Tyson, And I literally grabbed him. I grabbed his shoulders. Oh my God, I've got to tell you. I said, I'm with the Scientology and the Aftermath show. And, I had looked up the competition to see what our chances were. And I said, I have to tell you, I was really afraid that this was your year to win. And he said, don't worry about me. He said, sometimes there's just a year where there's a show that has to win because it's what's right. This is literally what he said to me. He's Scientology in the Aftermath, he's saying, was the show that had to win this year because it's what's right. Everybody in that audience was familiar with the show. People were literally at the ball coming up to the contributors and saying, I just want you you to know that I saw your episode and it really touched me and all that kind of stuff. And it was fantastic. It was a great experience. Hopefully it's not a once in a lifetime experience, but it always could just be a once in a lifetime experience. If you have any other specific questions for me in the subject, throw it in the comments once this video is finalized. I think all the comments that are made on the live broadcast get erased when this video is finalized and uploaded. So wait until it's uploaded. If you have any other comments, throw it in there and I'll do my best to answer them. And that's an hour, so that's all we're going to do. All right, guys. Good talking to you. Talk to you again soon.